Okay, hi everybody. It is so exciting to be here at the Let's Talk 2E Teachers Lounge. So kick back, grab your cup of tea or your glass of wine because we are here at our fourth. Okay, this meeting is being recorded. That's what Zoom just told me. That was exciting. Okay, so who knew? Zoom, every day Zoom does something different. And it's almost like, I don't know, I think somebody lives in my computer. A little woman apparently lives in my computer. So welcome everybody. We're at our fourth and final Let's Talk 2E Tuesday live panel featuring two of our fabulous experts and speakers from the recent Let's Talk 2E virtual conference for educators. I'm Julie Skolnick. I'm really glad to be here. I'm the founder of With Understanding Comes Calm and the producer of the Let's Talk 2E conferences, which we produce for parents, educators, and clinicians. And hot off the press, this is kind of a secret, but in November, we're going to actually be producing the first ever 2E adult conference, which I'm really excited about. So I love guiding, mentoring, and supporting parents, teachers, 2E adult clients, and I love bringing experts together and to the forefront to really talk about the important issues that we're wondering about so that we can learn, so that we can have durable, impactful strategies that we can use in our classroom or our home. And our conferences always provide lots of resources, free gifts from our speakers. And you're here tonight because either you have already attended or bought the Let's Talk 2E Educator conference, or you have a good friend who told you about this awesome Facebook page, which is free and open to anybody. So if you find yourself right now going, oh man, so-and-so would love to know about this, please get it out there, tweet, whatever you can do on social media to let people know to join the Let's Talk 2E Teachers Lounge, even right now, so that they can join us or they can watch the recording afterwards. And if you haven't purchased the Let's Talk 2E Educator Conference, just FYI, it is still deeply reduced at $127. We like to say, watch what you want, when you want, because it's on demand. We know how busy you are. We know that you're teaching virtual, hybrid, high flex, in person. I don't even know if I know all the lingo, but you're feeling like you're doing the work of 2 or 3 people more than ever, teachers. So the idea is for us to bring some of our conference speakers to you live so that you can ask questions if you have any of them. So what we're going to do tonight is we are going to, I just realized, guys, I forgot, I have to thank Victoria Rose Super, my amazing media strategist, who is sort of behind the scenes and who I like to refer to as my frontal lobe. She's going to be chatting in the Facebook page where you all are. And I'm here with our guests on Zoom broadcasting live. So we don't see you, but Victoria Rose will tell us if you have questions. So put your questions in the chat if you have any questions. Okay. So tonight we're focusing on clinical considerations. We have 2 incredible experts, Dr. Nicole Tetreault and Dr. Jerry Schultz. So Dr. Nicole is a neuroscientist, author, meditation teacher, and international speaker on topics of neurodiversity, neurodevelopment, creativity, mental health, and wellness. As the founder of Awesome Neuroscience, she translates neuroscience and positive psychology for people to live their best lives. Dr. Tetreault has authored numerous academic papers on intelligence, autism, brain evolution, neuroinflammation, and behavior. Her recently released book, Insight into a Bright Mind, and when I say recently, I mean super recently. Nicole, give a wave, and I know you're going to tell us about your book. I actually got to write an intro to it, so that was really exciting, and it's an amazing book. This book, Insight into a Bright Mind, explores groundbreaking research examining the experiences of unique, creative, and intense brains through interviews, storytelling, and literary science while advocating for new directions of human and neurodiversity. Dr. Jerry Schultz is a former middle school teacher, a parent, and a clinical neuropsychologist on the faculty at Harvard Medical School in the Department of Psychiatry. He currently serves as an international consultant on issues related to neuropsychology and education of students with special needs, including twice exceptional kids. His recent research and writing focuses on the impact of stress and anxiety on students of all ages. Kind of timely. I guess it's always timely, Jerry. He is a content expert and frequent contributor at understood.org and at attitudemag.com. And his book, called Nowhere to Hide: Why Kids with ADHD and LD Hate School and What We Can Do About It, examines the role of stress in learning and has served as a practical guide for families and schools across the globe. So, so amazing to have you guys here. So thank you for being here, Jerry and Nicole. So I know I'm talking a lot and I can't wait to stop talking and to start listening. So I'm gonna ask some questions of you guys. And again, if you have questions out there, please chat them and Victoria Rose will help us so that we can answer them for you. So let me start with you, Dr. Nicole. If you can, it's really important for people to understand what asynchronous development is. And I'm wondering if you can talk to us about it and how a student might exhibit asynchrony in a learning environment.
Yeah, so that's a great question. It's kind of what we think about when we think about gifted and 2E kids in general, is the kid who's out of sync, where, they may be reading 3 to 5 grades ahead of their classmates. And when it comes to production and communication on the test, they may blank out, they may have dysgraphia, may not be able to produce their actual written ideas and knowledge. And what we know about the brain in particular is that it, from Shaw's really original study, looking at it, that this part of the brain, which you said, Victoria Super Rose, is your frontal lobe, we know this part of the brain doesn't develop, really, it develops all throughout our lives through our mid-30s, but in particular for gifted and really bright kids, we know that there's this rapid brain expansion that happens between ages 9 through 14. So like the onset of puberty. And we know that this frontal cortex it houses, your emotional saliency, your communication, your, regulation, your ability to take out motor activity. And so that's one piece of it. And then we also know that other parts of the brain can be developing out of sync. Like you could have the sensory cortex here developed in advance. Like, for example, in a young child, you could have a child where they develop really early audition abilities, where they can hear things kind of at an elevated level. They could have sensory feedback where, tags and different things their receptivity can technically be elevated. And that part of the brain can be expanded. So when you're thinking about a child who could be asynchronous, you could have this child coming into the classroom where they're super bright, but this frontal cortex isn't fully online for them to communicate and produce and even be able to regulate themselves in a school environment. And so you could be missing their actual intellectual ability. You could be missing their basic essence because they're really kind of waiting off their environment due to, kind of stress and perhaps even overstimulation that they're experiencing. And so we know we know our brains don't develop uniformly. We also know that the brain, develops uniquely for each of us. We each have our very own unique brain print. Nicole, Julie, and Jerry, and Victoria, we all have our individual experiences, our individual genetics, and then the way that we've developed our brains based on our strengths and also based on our trauma. And so sometimes kids could just completely be missed because they're still developing. And I really kind of hone this in, even when you think about ADHD, for example, we know that the frontal cortex develops even later in life. And in fact, the opposite happens where their motor cortex develops earlier. And so again, their behaviors can be out of sync as well.
So, when a student comes into the classroom and you're like, wait, it's just the beginning of the day already, right? Like then what's happening is all the stuff on the way to school that was heightening their sensory input or response might be what you're talking about.
It could be that. It could be external triggers. It could be internal dialogue of triggers of, sometimes these kids could even get into a feedback loop where they, kind of have a lot of negative self-talk. So then they can't even get out of their initial stress response. So perhaps they're reacting to lights or sensory cues, but that kind of triggers a relational pattern where they kind of can't get out of it and they become stuck.
So I'm imagining, not everybody has a frontal lobe sitting on their desk, but maybe that would be helpful if we all did. But if it almost sounds like some of the sensory parts of the brain are overdeveloped or more developed. The frontal lobe isn't able to compensate for all of that. So then we end up in our primitive brain and our amygdala, and we're in fight or flight.
Yeah, fight, flight, freeze, or flop. So you could be kind of having an emotional dysregulation, and depending on the kind of patterning and conditioning you have, So in my book, I talked about a little bit about a young girl where she basically was dealing with sensory triggers all throughout school that she couldn't even take in information because the lights, the bells, was causing her to directly go into the principal's office, curl in a ball, because she was so overtaxed, so stimulated that it was sort of woven. And so you have to think about that. A lot of our memory is encoded in sensory information. That's one way we take in information. And so if it's constantly being inundated with, patterning that's traumatic, then you're going to have a response where somebody is going to fall into the pattern of the fight, flight, freeze, or flop. And I kind of always talk about it, and Jerry's going to probably talk way more about this, is, people kind of default into their natural mode, so it's really important to identify in kids if their primary response is a fight or flight, because they're going to have a very, very different reaction where, the fighters and flighters need to get the energy out. The freezers and flops are the ones that kind of dissociate and don't take in their environment. And so their conditioning and their reactions are going to be different. And in the classroom, it's going to present really differently. You could have a child who seems and appears completely tuned out, but they're actually managing a stress response.
Yeah. Well, that is really helpful to understand. So, Jerry, what do you want to add to this regarding anxiety and stress?
Well, first, I think I want to comment on something that Nicole said about, I'm a former middle school teacher, and I'm always struck with it when I go into middle school, when I was a teacher or when I visit a building, the diversity in size and texture of all these kids. So it's easy for us to think about diversity in terms of physical appearance, but for a teacher or a parent to think about their kid in these terms of being at different places in the development of their brain, it's all invisible. All you see are the behaviors that are related to what's going on inside. You can't see this 4-foot tall kid next to this almost 7-foot tall bearded student in a middle school hallway, but the kids all, they look different, and that's obvious, but we really have to stop and think that they think differently. And if once you understand that, and more important, I think, is once the kids understand that, then they can kind of adjust. You take a kid in the classroom, I think, who's a physically adept kid, that's a kid who might choose to do sports, but somebody who's a real klutz may avoid sports, but you don't know if the same equivalent is going on inside the brain. And kids don't have a choice. They can't say, I don't want to do school. I have to be here.
So I love that invisible diversity. Sometimes we talk about the invisible disability, but that invisible diversity is really interesting, that concept of not seeing the difference in the way that the brain works. That is really great. So Jerry, I guess I want to know about gifted characteristics that have negative consequences and cause stress. What is typical in our gifted profile or two-way profile that then just on its own causes stress? Obviously, asynchronous development is part of that, but what else can you share with us?
I don't want to generalize, but I think we know enough about these kids to know that some of these kids are perfectionists. You know, they really want to do something, do it well, do it thoroughly. And if they can't do that, or they don't think they're headed down that road, they switch gears and do something else, because that's being competent at something is comforting. Doing something that is matched to your ability level and doing it well is it's like pulling the lever of a slot machine. It feeds all the pleasure centers of your brain and makes you very happy. But one of the things that I think that gifted and talented kids, 2E kids do, is they look at a task and they quickly make an assessment of whether this is something they want to do, they can do, or they're interested in. And if the check boxes don't get checked in those areas, they may tend to walk away from it. So some of the times you might see oppositional behavior or negative behavior in kids, or kids who are fighting you when you're asking them to do something which you as a parent or a teacher really understand and believe that they can do. And they probably can, but what you believe they can do has nothing to do with their success. They have to believe they can do it. They have to believe they want to do it. So we have this perfectionism. Some of these kids they're specialists. They like to go deep. They like to learn thoroughly and fully. And for a lot of these kids during this virtual environment that we're slowly coming out of, a lot of these kids are flourishing because they get to turn off their screens, go for hours and dig deep into something without having to be bothered by the next checkbox on the curriculum that their teacher is presenting to them. And wise teachers who get these kids say, I understand that you have interests and talents and abilities. Shut off the screen for a while, go deep, come back and let us know what you've learned and teach us something about what you've learned. And I think that's important. My concern is these kids are coming back into school, and to go deep means to stop doing what you're doing, a math worksheet, and go deep into whatever it is, American history. And you can't do that. You get into trouble for pursuing your passion. You can't do that until you get into college, or maybe in high school if you're lucky. But you have to follow these rules, and that's hard for these kids. Social distancing is another problem. Some of these kids don't like to affiliate with kids that they perceive are less intellectually talented. They don't want to hang out with kids who don't challenge them intellectually and who can't hold conversations with them. They don't want to be with adults who can't do that. So they go back to school, and we have this wonderful diversity in the classroom, and you're sitting next to two kids who have no idea what you're talking about when when you bring up quantum physics or something cool like that. So I think that's going to be a big adjustment, an additional source of stress for these kids. Some of these kids are easily bored. They master things in a very quick way. And when they do, they want to move on to the next thing. They don't want to do a worksheet that reinforces something that they knew 2 years ago. So you have all of these mismatches. I love the idea of asynchronicity in this whole thing, not only between parts of the brain and development, but things that kids are asked to do. There's a mismatch between what they do naturally. If you leave these kids alone on an island with a lot of sticks and tools and things, they can do miraculous things. But if you force them to live in a tent somewhere where they don't have any equipment to do it, they act out. They become kids who exhibit negative behaviors, and that's a real problem.
So it's really interesting. My clients are really pretty much in heaven or hell, and have been for this entire period of time, where either kids have removal of stimulation, and so being at home and online has worked, and then other kids who just need stimulation, need to be around people, and you're right, when we go back, some of the things we're going to have to think about is, I have clients who worry that their kids have lost information and learning. And I have parents who worry that they've accelerated their kids so much that they're going to be bored when they go back. And I think teachers are going to need to balance those two things. And like you said, Jerry, not give more worksheets, but help them go deep, or give them some, learning opportunities that allows them to really learn about their passions, which is really hard to do in a typical classroom. Dr. Nicole, let me ask you, what are strategies that can assist teachers in discovering, you see the behavior, right? We all say behavior is communication, but we don't necessarily know what that they're communicating. It doesn't necessarily indicate what's going on for them. So what are strategies to assist teachers to discover what underlies a 2E child's challenging behavior in the classroom?
Yeah, well, I think what was really beautifully said by Jerry was all the different areas that are, I kind of call them the pitfalls, right? Where there's that breakdown. And usually when a child is in a classroom and they're acting out, you have to remember that at the core of it, there's suffering that's happening. There's some sort of pain that's happening in their brain, in their mind, in their body, where they're disconnected with their learning environment and they're disconnected with the level of engagement. And so you have to understand, where is that happening? Is it because, one, that, for example, is the material not engaging? And it could be not engaging in two different ways. You could have a lack of engagement where it's either too advanced, or it could be kind of way below their level where their brain, we know the brain activation decreases when somebody does the same repetitive activity over and over, whereas there's increase in flow and activation in brain when things are novel. And so we have to really identify the child and identify where is that proximal zone of maximal engagement for their interest. Second, I think that, having this time, I think, like you're saying, some kids, they really miss that social connection. Other kids were in heaven without it, and they could be the introverts. And so I think it's really important to help children to know how to re-regulate. If you have a kid where going back to school and all the interaction is too much, it's okay for them to skip going to recess and go to the library and read to recharge. So kind of offering different types of mode for them to flourish. Some kids are going to need that break where they need to be in their body. They're very physical beings. And so I think the thing is to identify where, the pain point is for the child, and then come in and find ways that you can nurture. Most importantly, when a child's acting out, what they want to be told is they want to be told they're okay, it's going to be okay. And coming back to that emotional regulation where they can really name their experience and embrace it with compassion. And if you model compassion to them, then they too can learn that skill. I think so often we kind of minimize kids' experiences when they're having difficulty, and we mistake, I think what Jerry said about these invisible differences that we're seeing, that not seeing, and it's so funny. I have Fred Rogers here. And he talks about that similar thing in this book, where basically we all read the same thing, but we take in reading a book very differently. We feel it differently in our body. And so really investigating with the child what the origin is, and then finding ways to appropriately nurture them through their experience.
Yeah, I think that that's really helpful, a very helpful message. And I think that at the very least, that they're at the core, their suffering is so important for people to understand. They're not trying to make it hard for you, teacher, or the other kids in the class. They don't want to be that kid, and they can't help it. We have a question from somebody who's on the Facebook Live right now asking, I'm really dying to hear what you guys have to say. So, without forcing students to constantly do things they don't want to do around schoolwork, how can we help them understand that some things are non-negotiable? In other words, how can we help them persevere through boring tasks sometimes? So, Jerry, you want to take that one?
Yeah, I think it's a great question because it reflects the reality of our life. If you have a job and somebody says you have to do these things, you can't say, I don't want to do those, because you're out of work very quickly. So I think it's important to give kids who are in this category of kids, these 2E kids that we're talking about, give them choices, even categorize things as thou shalt and thou might, or maybe someday you can, but there are certain kinds of things. But I think what's missing in the equation sometimes is we say to kids, you have to do this. I'm your teacher and I'm paid to deliver a certain amount of curriculum. We have to think about the goals of what it is we're asking kids to do. And you can say to a kid who's really bright and talented, say, well, here's the goal. Can you demonstrate to me and to yourself and to anybody else that you've reached that goal? Be creative, let your fluidity flow, and come back and show me that and I'll let you take a pass on this. So what used to be a thou shalt becomes a wow, that's really cool. And the other thing to give kids to do that you can ask kids to do is to say, I have to teach this. You have to demonstrate that you've learned it. That's just the facts of our relationship here. Tell me how I could present it to you in a way that would be more interesting, more motivating to you, maybe take you beyond where you are right now. How can I change the learning experience for you? Or how can you change it for yourself so that you become more engaged, that you move the needle a little bit away from no way I'm going to do this to, okay, maybe I'll do this. And you might even like it. So I think giving kids, finding out what they bring to the learning situation is really important, because these kids have a lot of ideas about how they want to run their lives. Let them do it, but do it within the structure of choice.
Yeah, I love that. Getting the students buy-in. And we forget, parents forget too, like ask the kid to solve the problem. They're really good at that. Nicole, do you want to add anything?
I think that was great. I mean, the one thing I would add is ask the child, what is the resistance about this? And find out where their resistance lies. And I think the second thing is sometimes when you inquire what they're resisting to, you can offer them a solution. You can offer them, well, okay, say you have that kindergartner who does not want to write their name on their papers. And okay, if you don't learn this skill where your name is not on the paper, you're not going to get credit for your work. Now, that later on, when you do things like that in a board meeting, if you don't have your slides numbered right or something, or they're disorganized, people aren't going to buy into what you're saying. And so I think giving them the why it's important, why they have to learn these rote things, I think is a really, it helps with the resistance, and sometimes I feel like even with my son, explaining to him, sometimes this is a points game. Sometimes when you're looking at colleges, when you're looking at applications, you're doing it because numbers matter. And so, and if they understand, okay, I'm checking it off for that particular thing, this isn't my passion, then it kind of helps them understand the why. And it eases it a little bit, right? It's like, I don't want to eat my vegetables, but they have antioxidants, they can help you with your digestion, and so on and so forth.
I love that. So today in my parent empowerment group, we had a little conversation. Every parent was like, what is with teeth brushing and chewing kids? What is with teeth? I mean, every chewing kid does not want to brush their teeth. I mean, yes, sometimes it's sensory and sometimes it's boring. And so we have to have the conversation, and the parents are standing next to them brushing their own teeth. It's like a whole thing. So the other thing, I love the why, because, our kids want to know why, but also it's being flexible. So my son, when he was in 6th grade, I remember he severely written expression challenge. And so there was an answer within the question. Instead of writing it, he circled it in the question and put an arrow to the answer. And he was not given credit for it. So the question was, were you testing his ability to write an answer in a space, or were you testing, does he know what he's talking about, right? So always be aware and flexible in how they can show what they know, I think is really important too, because there might be something else coming at that, and that's not the time to address it in that case. So yeah, please.
I just want to jump in with something before I lose the thought.
Yeah.
It's interesting to me from my work looking at kids who are under stress. One of the things that causes a lot of stress in kids is that they don't feel they have a great degree of control over things in their environment. So one of the things to look at, one of the dynamics to look at is talking to kids about how much control they have over things in their life. They control when they eat, when they go to bed, where they go to school, what they learn, and all those kinds of things. but also in that control kind of pie, there might be a slice of that pie that says, these are things that will not be in your control. These are things that are in my control or a teacher's control or the government's control or whatever it might be. And that's part of life that you have to learn. Let's look at the rest of the pie and identify things that you feel totally in charge of in your life. Can you decide when to fall asleep at night, not when to go to bed? But if you want to stay up with your eyes open all night long, can you control that? Yeah, you can, but you're going to pay the price for that. But that's in your control. What you wear to school, you have to wear something on the top and something on the bottom, but you have a choice about how you do that. So I think when you kind of put that into a pie of control, there it's first of all, it's surprising and depressing to see how many kids say, I have no control about anything in my life. My life is so structured. I can't ride my bike anywhere. I can't play when I want to. I can't do things with people. Everything is controlled by a lot of people. And I think over the years, that has changed a lot. I'm a lot older than both of you are, but I had a lot of freedom in my life. If you did the things that I did as a child now for fun and for discovery, I'd be arrested. Kids are arrested. They're hauled in for doing these kind of wonderful things. So I was born at the right time from that. But if you don't have any control over, you don't feel like you have any control over your life, what's the use of it? What's the fun of it?
So other than learning that Jerry's a rebel, we are that I love that exercise, guys. Teachers, do that with your kids. What's their classroom control? Let's make pie. Maybe do it on Pie Day on top of it all. Wouldn't that be fun? Oh, I love it. Okay, well, Jerry, you brought up the stress word, and I want to, your session at Let's Talk 2E was the impact of stress and anxiety on 2E kids, what to know, what to do. So talk to us a little bit about the relationship between anxiety and stress.
Well, it's a good question because people get them confused and there's some similarities to me. Stress is actually the force that exerts itself upon us. If you're an airplane flying through the air, stress is what causes the wings to shake up. I shouldn't say that, it scares people, but it's an external force. Anxiety.
That causes anxiety, Jerry.
I was off duty all day.
Nice. We're taking it on the road, guys. We're taking it on the road.
Flower in a garden and the wind is blowing the flower back and forth. The wind is the stress that makes it. You're feeling more relaxed now, I hope.
Yes.
It's so bad for my reputation. Anxiety is the reaction to that stress. If you're a dandelion and the wind blows you back and forth, you might say, oh no, I'm going to lose all those little fluffy things that are going to fly away. But if you're like a sunflower, you may say, cool, man, I love this. This is just chilling out here in the wind. So how you react to the stress involves anxiety. You can have a little anxiety, a lot of anxiety, but we tend to interpret stress in another way. Stress is kind of that feeling like I feel stressed or I am stressed or you're making me stressed. So it's more of an internalized feeling of that. So the anxiety is kind of like your thermometer going up to say stress is causing me to feel anxious. So they're related, but it's important to differentiate them because you have to look at the source of the stress. If it's the wind on the flower, you can, put a fence around it and cut down the stress. But if the external force is inevitable, that is being in a classroom, being on a screen, whatever it might be, you may not be able to make that go away. So one of the things that this helps me think about a lot is how do you get kids to understand when they feel this feeling of anxiety or stress, or the anxiety comes from stress, and how do they gain a sense of control over that? Because we get to that theme again. The more things that are not within our control, the greater stress we feel. I like to give the example of Navy SEALs. They live and work in one of the most stressful environments that anyone could imagine. Their lives are at stake, and their safety of their buddies is at stake. But they don't feel it as stress. They feel it as a pressure to perform at the highest level of their capability, and they know that when they do that, that they will conquer the challenge. So if you trade Navy SEAL in for a page full of long division problems and the kid is feeling like I can't do that, it's really important to help a child understand his or her perception of the difficulty level of the task, B, his perception of his ability to do it, and probably third is his willingness to do it. So you can show a Navy SEAL a task and she or he will say, that's a 5-level task. That's extremely hard. Then you say, what's your ability to do that? The SEAL is going to say, piece of cake. I've been there. I can handle it. What's your willingness to do it? Bring it on, says the Navy SEAL. So if we can kind of recreate those Navy SEAL situations, we're really looking ideally for what I call a 3-3 combination. A child who sees the task somewhere in the middle of this 5-point rating scale and says, it's in a work zone, I can handle it. And then what's your ability? Well, my ability is really low. It's not that difficult, but I don't have much ability to do it. So then you as a parent or a teacher can say, well, how do we strengthen your ability? 3, this is a required task. And if you don't feel like you have enough skill to do it, we have to build up your skill level. If we don't, you're under chronic stress. And I, as the controller of your learning environment, can help with that situation. So I could go on for days with this whole model, but I think the idea of having kids right there, perception of the difficulty, their ability level, and their willingness. The kid may say, that's hard, I can do it. I don't want to do it. I'm not in the mood to do it. I don't like this. I don't like math, but this is stupid. Get me out of here. And so that's when you get into these negotiations about doing things that you have to do. All right.
Well, I can imagine that that would be a great exercise to get started to do. And you could even do it to, obviously fun things that they love to do. And then before assignments to sort of just mitigate, make space for that potential stress and know.
It's a great comment about having them focus on things that they can do. So you have a kid pick something that he or she loves to do, look at their perception of the difficulty level, their perception of the ability level, and their perception of their willingness. And then when they get into a situation that doesn't have those high rankings, you say, what do we do to change this, So yeah. That's an important thing to think about.
Dr. Nicole, join in and tell us something about the brain with this awesome 3-step process that I can just read your thought bubble.
Yeah, no, I think the 3-step process is fantastic. I mean, I talk about it in my book where I say scale the event. So it's a little bit different in terms of responding to stress with an anxious response. And so I think though, when you offer children, strategies where they feel that they're in control, that gives them kind of that assurance and that empowerment. And also it builds that resilience within them where they know, okay, my ability was a 1. I worked with a partner, I worked with somebody, and my motivation was a 4, and and my willingness was a 2, and I got it done. And they recognize, okay, I got through this, and it's building that muscle. And like you said, when you bring in things that they love, like a positive experience, like how willing are you to go outside and play basketball, and hit, throw hoops and see, how many you can get into a slam dunk. And so when you give the children, that ability and that choice, and in even teenagers, I mean, I think even now too, Jerry points out that even teenagers, I think, are so under stress from their environment, where the performance and school and that social connection, we know in general, kids are doing up to, 5 to 7 hours of homework a night, where they're missing those actual in-person interactions before the pandemic. And then the pandemic elevated that. And so I think that, also restructuring where there is that more kind of coming back. I mean, I think in the pandemic, we learned a bit that we can ease off, of this accomplishment kind of success mode and allow the kids to naturally flourish. And, kids being able to just walk around in a neighborhood and do kind of normal things. So anyway, that was kind of a random, I kind of took it in a different direction from what we were talking about.
You took it in a great direction, because one of the things you suggested is looking at having the kid look at these ratings and kind of self-evaluate. So I think an important component of this model, if you will, is to have a kid go in afterwards and say, you said this was a 5, way wicked hard. And what do you think now? And the kid said, no. So the next time you encounter something that looks like, smells like, or feels like this, how might you rate it? Well, probably not a 5. All right. What you said your ability level was a 2. What do you think now that you've done this task successfully? I can do things like this. That's really where and you want kids to do that on their own. You don't want to have to take every task they have and analyze it in this way. You want them to internalize it. That's what successful people do. You're standing at the bottom of a mountain. You say, well, that's a really high mountain, but I've got my equipment, I've got my training, I've got previous experiences. It's going to be hard, but I can do it. And then afterwards, you come back down and you broke your leg or something. I'm making people anxious again. Oh my God. I don't know what happened up there, but you come back down and you say, well, wait a minute. Next time I do this, I need to be better prepared in some aspect of this task. And that's that's self-awareness, that's self-motivation, that's self-evaluation. Those are all the traits of a successful person. So we want to engender those traits in the kids that we care about.
Yeah, you're talking about really structured, positive self-talk and how you get there and how you can. So let me ask you guys this. So this is a great strategy, but sometimes our kids show up in the classroom and they're already anxious. They're all the stuff that we talked about at the beginning. And so they're displaying emotion dysregulation. And, one of my messages to parents and to educators is to manage expectations and to prioritize the social emotional piece of the child before anybody is all up in arms over how much learning didn't happen, how much learning can happen. And so I would love for you guys to talk about the kid who shows up or the kid who's like already over the top with anxiety. We can't do this exercise with them. There has to be an intervention first to kind of bring it all down, settle the snow in their snow globe, like I like to say. So what do you recommend to teachers when that's the case? And please say the first thing, let go of the learning, the learning expectation. Either, both of you.
Nicole, take it away.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is to, to really allow the child to regulate their nervous system. I mean, no learning is ever going to happen if a child's nervous. We know that when you're anxious, you're in your emotional brain. When you actually have true anxiety, you're in your emotional brain and you're unable to process using your frontal cortex and really unable to learn information. It demotivates, it really deactivates learning. And so the first thing is to really guide the child to safety. And a very simple technique, and in some kids it can work, and some you may have to do it in a different way, is simply having them take 3 deep breaths to begin with. We know that that's going to activate the vagus nerve. We know that that's going to allow for positive neurochemicals like oxytocin and vasopressin, which are the trust neurochemicals. And really, they got to kind of come down, and be in a calm state before you introduce any sort of learning. And then the other thing, so that's kind of just mindful breath. And in some cases, some kids can't access the breath. And so you can really kind of offer them a different type of anchor, like going into the body, and maybe the body may feel challenging. So you have them focus maybe on a finger, or have them focus on a nature scene, bring in an external resource that would be calming. The other thing is having a child, I really think it's valuable to have them identify their own resources. So when they get into that mode, what is something that naturally calms their nervous system? Is it going to be taking a walk outside in the playground, in the garden? Is it going to be quietly sitting with a book to regulate? And so have them really identify a list of resources that they know they can go to get them back online, and recognize that at the same time too, a very big piece of this is to take away the shame. Often when somebody gets stuck in an emotion, there's the layering of anxiety, and then you have embarrassment and shame and anger about, I should be better at this, I need to be over this. And so really kind of help them work through the layering of the difficult emotions. And then also, again, model compassion. When you offer compassion to a child, they can then learn the ability, sometimes, the breath isn't the easiest thing. And you could say, well, what would make you feel comfortable right now? What can we do? And ask them, if it's, simply just sitting, and being in that moment, and also getting them situated in their environment, getting them out of that headspace and say, what color is the chair right there? And get them their awareness into the room that they're in.
And I think it's important to take these wise suggestions and incorporate those into teaching on a daily basis. A teacher doesn't have to be a psychologist or a psychiatrist or even a therapist to do this. But Nicole you made such a great point about being embarrassed and shamed. If a teacher has kids explore as part of the unwritten curriculum, what are the kinds of things that get in the way of you being a successful person? What are the kinds of things that make you nervous or anxious? Do you know what that feels like? What have you done in your own personal life, whether you're 7 or 17, that works for you? And what's in your toolkit? What's in your stress reduction toolkit? How do we use that? And then when a teacher gives an assignment, one of the first things he or she might say is, look at the assignment before you even pick up a pencil or get a piece of paper. What is your body telling you about the assignment? What messages are you sending your brain? And if you're sending your messages, I can't, this stinks, it's too hard, then the next thing you do is not going to be filled with success. Your brain is primed, exquisitely primed to help you stay out of dangerous situations. So if your perception is this is negative, your brain is really, really good at getting you out of the situation. Your fear center activates, your prefrontal cortex shuts down. You don't think about thinking, you think about how to find the exit sign. And your legs get more blood and your heart gets more blood and you want to run. And those aren't conditions, as you pointed out, that are primed for learning. But when kids understand, even for a little kid level, the basics of neuroscience of stress and what you can do to control it and to reduce it, it's a gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah, that's a really great point. So that list of resources that you talk about, what I talk about with clients is establishing win time, WIN, what I need, and having a list of resources that you can just go to, because when it's in the moment, it's really hard to think of what you need. And then a really great strategy you just made me think about that actually Seth Perler, who is also a speaker at our conference, when he was talking about executive functioning, he actually, before even addressing executive functioning, he suggested that teachers take the temperature, and I actually do this in my parent group, take the temperature of the students. How are you feeling today? Show me with your fingers, 1 to 5, and you can do it 2 is this way or this, or however you want to do it. And that allows him to be able to then go and check in with the child who's a 2 instead of a 5, and see what's going on, and then be able to take the temperature at the end of the class and see where people are to help the next teacher understand what to do. So I think this incredible conversation has really kind of put out there lots of different ways of thinking about how 2E kids experience stress, anxiety, and that what drives that or can drive that just in the gifted profile itself. And then ways of remembering to address the strengths and use them as a portal for the kids to be able to succeed and to always come toward it with compassion. And, especially right now in the world as we know it, that compassion is so important. It's important, teachers, for you to be able to feel like you can give compassion. It's important for your students to be able to receive compassion. And it's important for everybody to role model it for each other. So I'm really glad that was brought up by you guys. I'm indebted to you. Thank you, Jerry and Nicole. And if you want to learn more about them, their incredible books, resources, where they're going to be next, you can look in the chat in the Facebook group where Victoria Rose has put their stuff. If you decide, geez, I'd like to hear more, Dr. Nicole's talk was a lens into neurodiversity in and out of the classroom, and Dr. Jerry's was the impact of stress and anxiety on 2E kids, what to know, what to do. You can go to letstalk2e.com, and then you'll get all sorts of stuff and lots of great information about teaching 2E kids. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Nicole and Jerry, for being with us. really amazing, awesome conversation. I love spending time with you guys.
This has been fun. Thanks for having me on. It's been great getting to know Nicole through this experience and learn more from you, Julie. It's a great resource for a lot of people, and I'm happy and proud to be a part of it.
Thank you, Jerry.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and a pleasure speaking with you, Julie and Jerry, and all of your wisdom shared. And I learned, and I'm so appreciative. And I think this is a gift that keeps giving to the families and children. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks. So Victoria Rose, you'll take us off live, and it's a wrap.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.